the calm in the chaos. So let's start out by kind of naming how I'm hearing a lot of our teachers feel every day in the classroom. Now, all of our teachers, whether you're new, veteran, they still bring that passion, that true commitment for student support. But what's happening is some of our new teachers are kind of overloaded with stimulation, support, and they're stressed and thinking about they too have unmet needs. So this is about something deeper than that classroom control. This is how do we turn this disruption into kind of regulation? And how do we help students build the internal skills that they need to manage themselves and not just kind of comply with what we want them to do in the classroom? So that brings me to the hidden cost of disruption. So when we think about disruption, we always think about these moments in time, right? This one comment a student made that kind of disrupt, that one outburst, right? That one referral that I had to write up, right? But when you really zoom out and thinking about what is the cost for all these disruptions, it's staggering. Research shows that low-level behaviors quietly continue to drain nearly 3 weeks of instructional time each year, right? And so we think that is not just a kind of one-and-done behavior problem. It kind of is a crisis, right? And it's kind of hidden in plain sight. So I like to say behavior is a symptom and not the disease, right? This slide is so critical because behavior equals communication, right? It's what we see on the surface. So it may be students talking out, it may be students shutting down or just defiance. It's often rooted in stress, trauma, right here, mental health, thinking our challenges, or kind of missing the executive function skills that we all need and support. And if we only respond to the actual disruption of the behavior, we kind of miss the cause, right? And often when we miss the cause, the behavior, it always comes back around, and you'll either see it the next hour, the next day, or sometimes the next week. So how do we move from the policy to how do we prevent, right? And for years and years and decades, schools have been trained to react, right? React to the problem, police the behavior after it happens. But this reaction kind of keeps us stuck, right? We're moving, but we're stuck in this cycle of shame and removal, and let's take them out of the classroom, bring them back in, okay? And so when we think about if we can move the shift, talking about prevention and what does that mean? Proactive management really treats behavior to a skill to be taught. And so just like reading or math, it kind of builds that confidence and stops the escalation before it starts. So really thinking about how do we move from the old way to our new way. So here are the 4 pillars of a regulated classroom. Really, regulated classrooms don't just happen, right? They are built on these 4 pillars, right? Clear expectations. Do we have clear expectations for our students? Have we built those strong relationships, right? Do we have a connection with our students? Do we truly know them? Are we explicit in our regulation skills, right? Do we teach students to kind of monitor their own body, their own calm? And what is our response? Really, do we have consistent responses over time, right? And we think of these 4 pillars, but when one pillar is missing, it's kind of like the table wobbles. But when all 4 are strong in a classroom, students feel safe, and safety, to be honest, is the foundation for learning. So how do we eliminate the guesswork? I always say champs, 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 woo, right? And so I always say uncertainty breeds anxiety. So when students don't know what's going on, they don't know the agenda, they don't know what's happening next, it breeds anxiety, right? And anxiety fuels disruption, right? And so when I think of champs, it removes this idea of I'm not sure what's going on. By answering every question, students are silently asking, okay, what can I do in this situation? Can I talk? Can I move, right? Can I sharpen my pencil? All the things. How do I get help if I don't know? Do I raise my hand? Can I go up to the teacher if I don't want to ask out loud, right? And for our students, they need to know what success looks like. And so when the expectations are given and explicit, students don't have to kind of test the boundaries to see if this is okay or if this is not okay, to make sure they feel secure and safe. So with champs, we think, okay, can our students talk? Can they whisper talk? Can they talk to their partner when they're working through their assignment? When do they ask for help? One of the things I remember a teacher saying, ask 3 before me. So it was okay for students to get up and walk around to ask questions. The activity, what is the task? What's the expectation? What do you want them to do? What does the sample look like? What is the movement? Can they get out of their seats? Can they move? Can they work under their desk? Can they work in the hall, right? What is the expectation around that? Participation, right? What does active work look like? Am I talking to my partner? Am I talking out loud? Am I conversing, online in an online forum, right? And then success. What does the result have to look like? What is the rubric? What is the expectation? And do I have a sample of that? And I hate to say this, but of course, as educators, you have to master the art of planned ignoring. I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for saying this, but not every behavior kind of deserves this center stage, right? So some behaviors, survive because they are kind of rewarded with that attention. So thinking of planned ignoring paired with positive, behavior, positive reinforcement, nearby breaks, breaks that cycle, and it helps with that. So, and I want to say this isn't like neglect. You're not neglecting that student, right? It's another strategy. And so we are teaching the students that kind of which behaviors kind of earn that engagement or that support or positivity, and which ones really don't. Now, I want to highlight this. Really, up to 93% of communication is nonverbal, right? We do this, bathroom, whatever that means, right? In your classroom. But this means even thinking about our posture, right? Up at the front of the class, our proximity with students, our facial expressions, our no, yes, go, right? And thinking of the movement often matters so much more than the words our teachers say. So thinking instead of like stopping instruction to kind of correct behavior, we can do silent signals, redirect, proximity, walk to the student to preserve dignity, and keep the momentum going to keep teaching. So we don't want to stop the learning flow. So really thinking about what signals are using in the classroom to kind of support students, what signals are they using, and how do you redirect behavior without breaking the lesson workflow? Sit idle is the enemy of order. Thinking of that, when students are idle, the behavior fills the gap. Just being low-key honest, right? The traditional hand raising allows for most students to kind of disengage and opt out. And I remember going through a couple of classrooms, I want to say last week, and the teacher was like, hey, it was a well-behaved class. I said, yeah, but you have 16 students that are second language learners. How do we engage them? Sometimes we assume compliance for, just understanding the content, right? And so when we don't engage all of our students, then, we are really missing the ball here. So really thinking about who is disengaged in your classroom and how do we keep the engagement strategies, right? Response cards, maybe there's participation, maybe there's universal participation, right? Where we require every student to kind of think, respond. Thinking about how we can use engagement because it's the most powerful behavior supports that we have. So I see we are still doing this. We have a couple of people that's implement response cards or, hand gesture signals or, whiteboards. So thinking of how do we keep our students engaged to create the lack of idleness in the classroom. Teaching the pause, right? Teaching the pause, right? Thinking of the impulse is fast, right? Regulation takes place. Teaching students to pause between impulse and action is so life-changing. So thinking like tools like breathing, quick resets, self-monitoring, reflection really helps students to kind of build a moment of choice before they do it, right? So think of that pause is where that self-regulation is born. So here's the impulse. We can sometimes track or monitor how many blurt outs do we have, having our students do that. Have our students reset, maybe a call to action, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, breathe, and then reflect, right? And if we continue on this path, students will eventually we teach the pause, right? Students will eventually take on the pause, and we want them to self-regulate based on some things that we've done out loud. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm all about that connection, right? Connection before correction. And I say that even with families. How do we make sure we've connected with the families before we kind of spew out, hey, what things are going not right in the classroom, right? So correction without connection is rejection, right? It feels like rejection. You're rejecting the student. You don't know me, right? So students are far more receptive for kind of guidance when they kind of trust the adult that's giving out the guidance or delivering it, right? And to be truly honest, we can't regulate a child if we kind of have we are dysregulated ourselves, right? I see a lot of teachers clapping back at students. So how do we model a regulated body, self, and how do we become calm? Because sometimes our calm becomes their calm, but always think about we need to have our connection before correction. Now, low key. This is where it comes together. What is our return on our investment for regulation, right? When schools invest in being proactive and proactive regulation, our management discipline becomes more focused. Suspensions decrease, right? Our academic outcomes improve when teacher wellness rises as well, right? And so it's very strategic. we want to make sure that we have a return on our investment and it's measurable. So how are you measuring the SEL in the classroom, the supports, the modeling of the behavior you want to see, the positive reinforcement, the connection with the students? How are we modeling this to ensure that we have a return on our investments in our classrooms? I always say it's the architecture of order, like being order. Order isn't enforced. It's kind of methodically engineered. So when we set these clear expectations, when we explicitly teach regulation or the pause, right? When we respond consistently with students over time, and when we genuinely care and we show how we care and we show up every day, we don't just kind of manage the behavior. This is when we are proactive. We'll start to see our students transform, right? And this also transformed into lifelong learning. And now they have learned how to self-regulate, right? And this is how we change the outcomes. It's systematically and it's sustainably and, it's humane, right? Being connected with our students. I hope these tips help. I hope you enjoyed. If you want to learn more, DM me. Talk to you later. Bye.